Chapter 6. The Yoga Which Conquers Death. Brahma expresses a wish that I shall visit his dwelling. He tells me that he does not actually stay in the house, but has erected a roomy hut in the garden at the rear, so as to keep his freedom and preserve his independence. Accordingly, and I must confess with some eagerness, I call at the house one afternoon. The building stands in a dusty street, which bears a desolate and neglected air. I stand for a moment outside the ancient whitewashed structure and survey its wooden upper story, whose projecting window is so reminiscent of our medieval European houses. I push open the heavy old door which confronts me, an act which sends a rattling echo through the rooms and passages. An old woman, whose motherly smile stretches broadly across her face, appears almost at once and bows repeatedly before me. She leads me through a long, darkened passage until we emerge through a kitchen into the back garden. The first thing I notice is a spreading peepul tree, and then under the protective shade of its branches, an old-fashioned well. The woman guides me to a hut on the other side of the well, and close enough to it to receive some of the tree's shade. It is lightly built of bamboo posts, thin wooden crossbeams, and a thatched grass roof. The dame, whose face is as black as Brahma's, becomes visibly excited and bursts out into a series of trembling Tamil sentences apparently addressed to the hut. A musical voice answers from within. The door slowly opens. The yogi appears and then affectionately draws me into his simple hermitage. He omits to close the door. The widow remains in the entrance for the next few minutes, her eyes glued upon me, her face exuding indescribable happiness. I find myself in a plain room. A low cushionless divan stands along the farther wall, and a rudely made wooden bench which is littered with papers fills a corner. A heavily chased brass water pot hangs by a cord from one of the roof beams. The floor is covered with a large piece of matting. "Sit yourself," says Brahma, waving a hand towards the floor. "We have no chair to offer you. I am sorry." We all squat around the mat. Brahma, myself, and a young student teacher who has attached himself to me and is now acting as interpreter. Within a few minutes the old widow departs, only to return later with a pot of tea, which is served upon the mat in lieu of a table. She departs again and reappears with biscuits, oranges, and plantain fruits, which are heaped upon brass dishes. Before we begin to take these pleasant refreshments, Brahma produces a garland of yellow marigolds and hangs it around my neck. I am astonished and protest strongly, for I know that this Indian custom is usually reserved for distinguished persons, and I have never classed myself in that sublime category. "But, brother," he pleads smilingly, "you are the first European to visit my abode, and the first to become my friend. I must express my delight and the delight of this lady here by honoring you in this way." My further protests prove of no avail. I have perforce to sit on the floor with a wreath of marigolds draped ceremoniously over my jacket. I am indeed glad that Europe is sufficiently far away for none of my friends to notice this odd sight and laugh at me. We drink our tea, eat the fruit, and chat pleasantly for a while. Brahma informs me that he built the hut and made the rude furniture with his own hands. The sight of the papers on the corner bench aroused my curiosity, and I beg him to tell me their raison d'être, for I observe that the papers are all of a pink color, and that they have been written on in green ink. Brahma picks up a handful, which I perceive are written in quaint characters easily recognizable as Tamil. The student teacher examines the documents, but finds them hard to read and harder to understand. He informs me that they are written in an obsolete form of Tamil, which was the literary form of earlier centuries, but is nowadays only understood by few persons. He admits that the great classics of Tamil philosophy and literature are unfortunately written in this archaic form of language, which is called High Tamil, and which presents more difficulties for those only familiar with the modern living vernacular than medieval English presents to the average present-day English-knowing person. These papers are written by me mostly at night, Brahma explains. Some of them are accounts of my yoga experiences written in verse, and some are lengthy poems where I let my heart speak its religion. There are a few young men who call themselves my pupils who often come here to read these writings aloud. Brahma picks up an artistic-looking document which consists of a few pages of pink paper, written on it in red and green inks, and tied with a green ribbon, and smilingly presents it to me. "I have written this especially for you," he declares. The young interpreter finds it to be a poem of 84 lines. It opens and closes with the mention of my name, but beyond this the young man can hardly travel. He deciphers occasional words and tells me that the poem evidently contains some kind of personal message, but that it is written in such high Tamil that he is not competent to render a proper translation of it. However, I am extremely pleased to receive this unexpected gift, especially as it is an expression of the yogi's goodwill. After the celebrations of my visit are finally over, the old lady departs and we settle down to serious talk. I plunge anew into that matter of breathing which seems to play so important a part in yoga, and which is wrapped in such secrecy. Brahma regrets that he can show me no further exercises for the present, but he is willing to tell me a little more of his theories. Nature has measured out 21,600 breath rhythms to every man, which he must use up daily and nightly from one sunrise till the next. Quite noisy and tumultuous breathing exceeds this measure, and therefore shortens one's life. Slow, deep, and quiet breathing economizes this allowance, and so lengthens life. Every breath which is saved goes to build up a great reserve, and out of this reserve a man can draw extra years for living. Yogis do not take so many breaths as other men, nor do they need to but alas, how can I explain without transgressing my oaths? This reserve of the yogi tantalizes me. Is it possible that a knowledge which is hidden away with so much pains cannot have something of real worth in it? If that is really the case, then one can understand why these strange men cover up their tracks and conceal the treasure of their teachings in order to ward off the superficially curious, the mentally unready, and perhaps the spiritually unworthy. Is it likely that I, too, may come within one of these latter classifications, and eventually leave the country with little more than my trouble for reward? But Brahma is speaking again. Have not our masters the key to the powers of breath? They know how close is the connection between the blood and the breath. They understand how the mind, too, follows the path of the breath, and they have the secret of how it is possible to awaken awareness of the soul through workings of the breath and thought. Shall I not say that breath is but the expression in this world of a subtler force, which is the real sustainer of the body? It is this force which hides in the vital organs, though it is unseeable. When it leaves the body, the breathing stops in obedience, and death is the result. But through the control of breath it is possible to get some control over this unseeable current. But though we bring our body under extreme control, even to the point of controlling the beats of the heart, do you think that our ancient sages had only the body and its powers in view when they first taught our system? Whatever I think about the ancient sages and their purpose disappears in the intense curiosity which is suddenly aroused in my mind. "You can control the working of your heart?" I exclaim in surprise. My self-acting organs, the heart, the stomach, and the kidney, have been brought to some degree of obedience, he answers quietly, without a trace of boastfulness. How do you do that? One gains the power by practicing certain combinations of posture, breathing, and willpower exercises. Of course, they belong to the advanced degrees of yoga. They are so difficult that few persons can ever do them. Through these practices, I have conquered somewhat the muscles which work the heart, and through the heart muscles, I have been able to go on and conquer the other organs. This is indeed extraordinary. You think so? Place your hand upon my chest, just over the heart, and keep it there. With that, Brahma changes his position, takes up a curious posture, and closes his eyes. I obey his command and then wait patiently to see what is going to happen. For some minutes he remains as steady as a rock and almost as motionless. Then the beating of his heart begins to diminish gradually. I am startled to feel it become slower and slower. A thrill of eeriness spreads over my nerves as I distinctly feel his heart completely stop its rhythmic functioning. The pause lasts for about 7 anxious seconds. I try to pretend that I am hallucinating, but my nervousness is such that I know the attempt is useless. As the organ returns to life from its seeming death, relief seizes me. The beats begin to quicken, and normality is safely reached at length. The yogi does not emerge from his motionless self-absorption till some minutes later. He slowly opens his eyes and asks, "Did you feel the heart stop?" "Yes, most distinctly." I am certain that there was no hallucination about the feat. What other strange yogi tricks can Brahma play with his internal mechanism, I wonder? As if in answer to my unspoken thought, Brahma says, "It is nothing compared with what my master can achieve. Sever one of his arteries, and he is able to control the flow of blood. Yes, even to stop it. I, too, have brought my blood under some measure of control, but I cannot do that. Can you show me that control?" He requests me to take his wrist and grip it where I can feel the flow of blood through his artery. I do so. Within 2 or 3 minutes, I become aware that the curious rhythm which beats under my thumb is lessening. Soon it comes to a definite halt. Brahma has brought his pulse to a stop. I anxiously await the resumption of circulation in his artery. A minute passes, but nothing occurs. A second minute, during which I am acutely conscious of each second, likewise ticks itself away in my watch. The third minute is equally fruitless. Not until halfway through the 4th minute do I become conscious of a faint return to activity within the artery. The tension is relieved. Before long, the pulse beats at its normal rate. "How strange!" I exclaim involuntarily. "It is nothing," he modestly replies. "This seems to be a day of strange feats, so will you not show me another?" Brahma hesitates. "Only one more," he says at length, "and then you must be satisfied." He looks thoughtfully at the floor and then announces, "I shall stop the breath." "But then you will surely die," I exclaim nervously. He laughs but ignores the remark. "Now hold your hand flat under my nostrils." I obey him hesitantly. The warm caress of exhaled air touches and retouches the skin of my hand. Brahma closes his eyes. His body becomes statuesque in its steadiness. He appears to fall into a kind of trance. I wait, continuing to hold the back of my hand immediately under his nose. He remains as still and as unresponsive as a graven idol. Very slowly, very evenly, the caress of his breath begins to diminish. Ultimately, it completely ceases. I watch his nostrils and lips. I examine his shoulders and chest. But in no single case can I discover any external evidence of respiration. I know that these tests are not final and wish to make a more exhaustive test, but how? My brain works rapidly. There is no hand mirror in the room, but I find an excellent substitute in a small polished brass dish. I hold the dish under his nostrils for a while, and again in front of his lips. Its shining surface remains unmarred by any dullness or moisture. It seems impossible to believe that in this quiet conventional house, near a quiet conventional city, I have established contact with something significant, something that Western science may one day be forced to recognize against its will. But the evidence is there, and it is indubitable. Yoga is really more than a worthless myth. When Brahma ultimately emerges from his trance-like condition, he seems a little tired. "Are you satisfied?" he asks with a fatigued smile. "I am more than satisfied, but I am at a loss to understand in what way you can do it." "It is forbidden me to explain. The restraint of breath is a practice which is part of advanced yoga. To a white man it may seem a foolish thing to strive for, yet to us it is of much importance." "But we have always been taught that man cannot live without breath. Surely that is not a foolish idea." "It is not foolish. Nevertheless, it is not true. I can hold my breath for 2 hours if I wish. Many times have I done that, but I am not yet dead, you see." Brahma smiles. I am puzzled. If you are not permitted to explain, perhaps you can throw a little light upon the theory behind your practices. Very well. There is a lesson we can draw from watching certain animals, which is a favored method of instruction with my master. An elephant breathes much more slowly than a monkey, yet it lives much longer. Some of the large serpents breathe far more slowly than a dog, yet they live far longer. Thus, creatures exist which show the slowness of breathing may possibly prolong age. If you can follow me so far, the next step will be easier for you to grasp. Now, in the Himalayas, there are bats which go into winter sleep. They hang suspended in the mountain caverns for weeks, yet they do not draw a single breath until they again awaken. The Himalayan bears, too, will sometimes sink into trance throughout the winter, their bodies apparently without life. In deep burrows of the Himalayas, when food cannot be found during the winter, there are hedgehogs, which pass into sleep for some months, a sleep in which breathing is suspended. If these animals cease to breathe for a time and yet live, why should not human beings be able to do the same? His statement of curious facts is interesting, but it is not so convincing as his demonstration. The common notion that breathing is an essential function in every condition of life is not to be thrown aside at a few minutes' notice. We Westerners will always find it difficult to understand how life can continue in a body unless breathing continues also. Life always continues, he answers cryptically. Death is but a habit of the body. But surely you cannot mean that it may be possible to conquer death? I inquire incredulously. Brahma looks at me in a strange manner. Why not? There's a tense pause. His eyes search me, but they do it in a kindly way. Because there are possibilities in you, I shall tell you one of our old secrets. But I must first demand your agreement to one condition, and that you shall not attempt to practice any breathing exercise as an experiment, except those which I may teach you later. I agree. Keep your word, then. Now you have hitherto believed that the complete stoppage of breathing brings death. Yes. Is it not reasonable to believe also that the complete holding of the breath within one's body keeps life within us, so long as the breath is held, at least? Well, we claim no more than that. We say that an adept in breath control, who can completely retain his breath at will, thereby retains his life current. Do you grasp that? I think so. Imagine now an adept in yoga who can keep the locked breath not merely for a few minutes as a curiosity, but for weeks, for months, and even for years. Since you admit that where there is breath there must be life, do you not see how the prospect of prolonged life opens up for man? I am dumb. How can I dismiss this assertion as preposterous? Yet how can I accept it? Does it not recall to memory the idle dreams of our European alchemists of medieval times? Dreamers who sought an elixir of life, but who succumbed to the sickle of death one by one. But if Brahma is not self-deceived, why should he seek to deceive me? He has not sought my company and makes no effort to acquire disciples. A strange fear touches my brain. What if he is merely mad? No, he seems so sensible and rational in other matters. Would it not be better to regard him as mistaken? Yet something in me doubts even that conclusion. I am bewildered. Can I not convince you? He speaks again. Have you not heard the story of the fakir who was buried by Ranjit Singh in a vault at Lahore? The burial of the fakir took place in the presence of English army officers, while the last of the Sikh kings watched it himself. The living tomb was guarded by soldiers for 6 weeks, but the fakir emerged healthy and alive. Inquire into this story, for I have been told that it is written somewhere in the records of your government. This fakir had brought his breathing under great mastery and could stop it at will without danger of dying. Yet he was not even an adept in yoga, for I have heard from an old man who knew him when he was alive that his character was not good. His name was Haridas, and he lived in the north. If this man could live in an airless space for such a long time without breathing, how much more can be done by the true masters of yoga, who practice in secret and will not perform these marvels for gold? A pregnant silence follows our conversation. There exist other strange powers which can be acquired by way of our yoga, but who, in these degenerate days, will pay the heavy price to obtain them? There's another pause. We who live and work in the everyday world have sufficient to do without seeking such powers. I venture in defense of my epic. Yes, agrees Brahma. This path of body control is only for the few. Therefore the teachers of our science have kept it a silent secret through the centuries. It is not often that they seek after pupils. Pupils must seek after them. The next time we meet, Brahma visits my quarters. It is evening and we soon adjourn for dinner. After the meal and a short rest, we go out on the moonlit veranda, where I plant myself in a deck chair, while the yogi finds a mat on the floor more comfortable. For several minutes we silently enjoy the bright radiance of the full moon. As I have not forgotten the astonishing events of our last meeting, it is not long before I broach anew this incredible matter of men who snap their fingers at death. Why not? Brahma asked his favorite question. There is an adept in our yoga of body control who is hidden among the Nilgiri hills here in the south. He never stirs from his retreat. In the north there lives another whose home is a cave upon the snowy Himalayas. These men you cannot meet, for they disdain this world, yet their existence is a tradition among us, and we are told that they have extended their lives to hundreds of years. You really believe this? I exclaim in deferential doubt. Without doubt. Have I not the visible example of my own master? A question which has been on my mind for many days presses itself to the fore again. Hitherto I have hesitated in voicing it, but now that our friendship has come so close, I decide to give the query a bold outlet. I look earnestly at the yogi and ask him, Brahma, who is your master? For a while he returns my gaze but yields no answer. He looks at me hesitatingly. When he speaks, his voice is slow and grave. He is known to his southern disciples as Yerumbu Swami, meaning the ant-teacher. What a curious name, I exclaim involuntarily. My master always carries a bag of rice powder from which he feeds the ants wherever he may be. But in the north and among the Himalayan villages where he sometimes stays, he bears another name. Is he then perfect in your yoga of body control? Even so. And you believe that he has lived? I believe that he is over 400 years old. Brahma quietly finishes the sentence for me. There is a tense pause. I stare at him in bewilderment. Many a time he has described to me what happened during the reigns of the Mughal emperors, supplements the yogi, and he has told me stories of the days when your English India Company first came to Madras. Skeptical Western ears are unable to accept these statements. But any child who has read a history book could tell you such things, I counter. Brahma ignores my remark. He goes on. My master remembers clearly the first battle of Panipat, and he has not forgotten the days of the battle of Plassey. I recollect how he once referred to a brother disciple, one Vishudhananda, as a mere child of 80 years. In the clear moonlight, I noticed that Brahma's swarthy, broad-nosed countenance remains peculiarly unmoved while he utters these strange words. How can my brain, nurtured in the strict methods of inquiry, which modern science has called forth, entertain such assertions? After all, Brahma is a Hindu and must possess some of the legend-swallowing ability of his people. It is useless to contend with him. I shall remain silent. The yogi continues. For more than 11 years, my master was spiritual advisor to one of the old Maharajas of Nepal, the state which lies between India and Tibet. There he is known and loved by some of the village people who dwell among the Himalayan mountains. They revere him as a god when he visits them, yet he talks to them in a kindly way, in the manner of a father talking to his children. He gives no heed to caste rules, and he eats neither fish nor meat. How is it possible for a man to live so long? My thoughts involuntarily voiced themselves again. Brahma looks away, seems to forget my presence. There are 3 ways in which this is possible. The first is to practice all the postures, all the breathing exercises, and all of the secret exercises which comprise our system of body control. This practice must take place until one is perfect, which can be done only under a proper master who can show you in his own body what he teaches. The second way is to partake regularly of some rare herbs, which are known only to the adepts who have studied this matter. These adepts carry the herbs secretly, or hide them in their robes when traveling. When the time comes for the final disappearance of such an adept, he selects a worthy disciple, makes the secret known to him, and presents him with the herbs. To none else are they given. The third way is not easy to explain. Brahma stops abruptly. Will you not try? I urge. It is possible that you will laugh at my words. I assure him that, on the contrary, I shall treat his explanation with due respect. Very well. There exists a tiny hole inside the brain of man. Within this hole dwells the soul. There's also a kind of valve which protects this hole. At the bottom of the spine there comes into being the unseeable life current, which I have mentioned to you more than once. The constant loss of this current causes the body to grow old, but its control fills the flesh with new life and perpetuates it. When a man has conquered himself, he can begin to get this control by certain practices which are known only to advanced yogis of our school. And when he can withdraw this life current up his spine, he may then try to concentrate it into the hole in the brain. But unless he finds a master who will assist him to open the protective valve, he cannot succeed. If he finds a master who is willing to do this, then the unseeable current will enter the hole and turn into the nectar of longevity, as we name it. It is no easy task, for ruin waits in ambush for the man who attempts it alone. But the man who succeeds can induce a condition similar to death whenever he pleases, and so obtains the victor's power when real death seeks him out. In fact, he can choose the exact moment of his death at any time, and to the severest examination he will appear to have died naturally. One who has all these 3 methods at his command can live for many 100 years. So have I been taught. Even when he dies, the worms will refrain from attacking his body. A century later, his flesh will seem to be free from decay. I thank Brahma for his explanation, but I wonder. I am profoundly interested, but I am not convinced. Anatomy does not know this current of which he talks, and it has certainly never known his nectar. Are these stories of physiological marvels mere superstitious misunderstandings? With them one returns to the age of fable, the ancient days of long-lived wizards and magicians who hold the elixir of life. Yet the demonstrations of breath and blood control which Brahma has given me provide some assurance that yogi powers are not mere chimeras, and that these powers can undoubtedly be responsible for the performance of feats which must appear fabulous to the uninitiated. Beyond this point, I find it difficult to walk with him. I remain respectfully silent, careful not to allow my intellectual struggles betray themselves on my face. Such powers as these would be much desired by men who are nearing the grave. Brahma resumes, but forget not that the way to them is full of danger. Can you wonder that our masters say of these exercises? Keep them as secret as you would keep a box of diamonds. So you are unlikely to reveal them to me. Those who wish to become adepts should first learn to walk before they try to run. He replies with a faint smile. A last question, Brahma. The yogi nods. Where is your master now living? He has entered a temple retreat in the mountains of Nepal, on the yonder side of the Terai jungle. Is he likely to return to the plains again? Who can foretell his movements? He may remain in Nepal for many years, or he may begin his travels again. He likes Nepal best because our school of yoga flourishes better there than in India. You see, even the teaching of body control differs with different schools. And ours is the Tantra school, which is better understood in the atmosphere of Nepal than among the Hindus. Brahma reverts to silence. I guess that he is dwelling in devoted thought upon his enigmatic figure of his master. Ah, these things I have heard tonight are more real than legendary. Then indeed one may catch a glimpse of what it is around the corner. Man, ageless and immortal. If I do not hurry my pen, this chapter will never be brought to a close. Therefore, I shall endeavor to transfix the last memorable scene of my association with the yogi of the 5 names. The Indian night comes quickly on the heels of evening. There are no lingering sunsets as in Europe. And as the swift dusk begins to descend on his garden hut, Brahma lights an oil lantern and suspends it by a cord from the roof. We settle down anew. The old widow discreetly slips away and leaves me alone with the yogi and the student teacher who translates our words. The odor of burning incense touches the room with a mystical atmosphere. This evening, sad thoughts of parting steal over me. I try to brush them off, but fail. I cannot clearly tell this man, through the irritating barrier of speaking through a third person, what is in my heart. How far the novel facts and strange theories he has put forward are correct, I am little able to say, but I have appreciated his readiness to let me enter his solitary existence. I have felt at times that our hearts have drawn sympathetically near to each other, and I know now what it has meant to him to break his habitual reserve. Tonight, I have made a last attempt, under the shadow of impending departure, to induce him to reveal his deeper secrets. Are you ready to abandon the life of cities and to retire into solitary place in the hills or the jungle for some years? He asked me searchingly. I must first think this out, Brahma. Are you ready to give up all other activities, all your work, renounce your pleasures, and put your whole time into the exercises of our system, and that not merely for a few months, but for several years? I do not think so. No, I am not ready. One day, perhaps. Then I can take you no farther. This yoga of body control is too serious to become the mere sport of a man's leisure hours. I see my chances of becoming a yogi fade swiftly into nothing. I regretfully realize that the full system, with its many years of difficult training, its rigors and austere discipline, is not for me. But there's something else which is closer to my heart than the strange powers of the flesh. I confide in the anchorite. Brahma, these powers, they are wonderfully fascinating. One day I would really like to go more deeply into your training. Yet, after all, how much lasting happiness do they bring? Is there not something finer still in yoga? Perhaps I do not make myself clear. Brahma nods his head and says, I understand. We both smile. Our texts say that the wise man will follow up his practice of yoga of body control with the yoga of mind control. He remarks slowly, it can be said that the first prepares the way for the second. When our ancient masters received the principles of our system from the god Shiva, they were told that the final goal was not to be purely material. They understood that the conquest of the body was to be looked upon as a step towards the conquest of the mind, and this again as a way to become spiritually perfect. So you see that our system deals with things close at hand, indeed, with the body, but only as an indirect means of penetrating to the spirit. Therefore, my own master has taught me, first run your course in body control. Then you can take to the kingly science the mind control. Remember that a body which is mastered ceases to distract the mind. Only a few can plunge straight into the path of holding the thoughts. Yet if a man feels strongly drawn to the way of mind control, we do not interfere, for that then is his path, and that is a purely mental yoga. Even so, it is a training to make the mind like a steady light, and then that light is turned on to the abode of the spirit. How can one start such training? For that, again, it is necessary to find a master. Where? Brahma shrugs his shoulders. Brother, people who are hungry look eagerly for food. Those who are starving, however, will search like madmen. When you want a master as much as a starving man wants to eat, you will surely find one. Those who search sincerely will most assuredly be led towards him at the appointed hour. You believe that there is a destiny about the matter? You speak truly. I've seen some books. The yogi shakes his head. Without a master, your books are mere pieces of paper. Our word for him, guru, means one who dispels darkness. The man whose efforts and destiny favor him sufficiently to find a real teacher steps quickly into a state of light, for the master uses his own higher gifts to benefit the disciple. Brahma moves away to his bench of littered papers and presently returns with a large document which he hands to me. It is covered with an orderly arrangement of Kabbalistic signs, peculiar symbols, and Tamil characters drawn in red, green, and black inks. The top of the sheet is adorned with a large hieroglyphic symbol pattern like a scroll in which I recognize representations of the sun, moon, and the human eyes. All the sketches and writings fall around a central blank space. Last night I spent some hours preparing this, says Brahma. When you get back, paste one of my photographs in the center. He informs me that if I will concentrate my mind upon this queer but not inartistic document for 5 minutes before going to sleep at night, I shall dream clearly and vividly of him. Even if 5,000 miles separate our bodies, place your thoughts upon this paper and our spirit shall meet at night, he asserts confidently, and he explains that these dream meetings will be as actual and as real as our physical meetings have been so far. This brings me to mention that my trunks are all but packed, and that I shall soon be off. I am doubtful when and where I may see him again. He replies that he does not doubt that whatever destiny has been allotted us must be fulfilled, and then he confides in me. I leave this place in the spring, when I shall go to the Tanjore district, where 2 students await me. As for what will happen thereafter, who can say? For as you know, I hope one day to receive the call from my master. There is a long silence, which Brahma eventually breaks by addressing me in a voice which is lowered to a hushed whisper. I turn to the student teacher, preparing myself to receive some new revelation. Last night my master appeared to me. He spoke to me about yourself. He said, "Your friend, the Sahib, is eager for knowledge. In his last birth he was among us. He followed yoga practices, but they were not of our school. Today he has come again to Hindustan, but in a white skin. What he knew then has now been forgotten. Yet he can forget for a while only. Until a master bestows his grace upon him, he cannot become aware of this former knowledge. The master's touch is needed to help him recover that knowledge in this body. Tell him that soon he shall meet a master. Thereafter light will come to him of its own accord. This is certain. Bid him cease his anxiety. Our land shall not be left by him until this happens. It is the writing of fate that he cannot leave us with empty hands." I draw back, astounded. The lamp throws its beams of light upon the little assembly. My young interpreter's face seems stricken with awe in that yellowish glare. "Did you not tell me that your teacher was in distant Nepal?" I demand reproachfully. "Indeed, he remains there still. Then how on earth can he travel 1,200 miles in a single night?" Brahma smiles cryptically. "My master is ever present to me, though India's span lies between our bodies. I receive his message without letter or bearer. His thought speeds through the air. It reaches me, and I understand. Telepathy, if you wish." I rise, for it is time to go. We wander out on our last moonlight walk together, and pass the ancient walls of the temple which stands not far from Brahma's house. The moon filigrees through the many-branched trees as we halt at a lovely group of palms which borders the road. Whilst he is bidding me farewell, Brahma murmurs, "You know that I have but few possessions. This is the thing I value most. Take it." He grasps the fourth finger of his left hand and pulls at it. He holds forth the palm of his right hand. I see a golden ring glistening in the center under the rays of the moon. 8 slender claws grip a round green stone, whose face is veined with reddish-brown markings. Brahma puts it in my hand as we clasp in farewell. I attempt to return the unexpected gift, but he meets my refusal by pressing it more determinedly upon me. One who enjoys great wisdom and yoga gave this to me. In those days I was traveling far and wide for knowledge. Now I beg you to wear it. I thank him and inquire, half jokingly, will it bring me good fortune? No, it cannot do that. But there is a powerful charm within the stone, which will help you penetrate the company of secret sages, and which will help you awaken your own mystic powers. This you will realize by experience. Wear it when you need these things. There is a final and friendly parting, and we go our ways. I walk slowly away, my head filled with a strange medley of thoughts. I muse over the extraordinary message from Brahma's far-off master. It is too extraordinary for me to dispute. I remain silent before it while belief and skepticism fight a fantastic conflict in my heart. I glance at the golden ring and ask myself, how can a mere ring possess any real efficacy in these matters? I do not understand how or why it can influence me or others in any mental or spiritual manner. The belief savors of superstition. Yet Brahma seems so confident of the reality of its fanciful properties. Is it possible? I feel almost impelled to answer. In this strange land, all things may be possible. But intellect rushes to the rescue and puts up a barricade of question marks. I fall into a fit of musing abstractions, so that I move away, startled when I stumble against something and knock my forehead. Looking up, I behold the poetic silhouette of a palm tree and the fireflies making a myriad dancing points of light between the branches. The night sky is deep blue. Venus, a point of intense brightness, seems quite close to our planet. Infinite peace broods over the road as I walk. A mysterious stillness enthralls me. Even the large bats, which occasionally appear and sweep over my head, move their wings silently. The scene charms me. I stop for a moment. The moon diffuses a light which turns a man who is approaching me into a flitting ghost. When I reach my quarters, I find that wakefulness lingers late this night. Close to dawn, sleep comes at last, drowning my whirl of thoughts in forgetfulness. Chapter 7. The Sage Who Never Speaks. I must break the chronological character of this record and wander backwards in time for a week or so if I am to catch the record of a not uninteresting encounter. During my stay in the suburb, outside Madras, I have not neglected to pursue diligent inquiries within Indian circles in the city itself, with reference to the existence of outstanding figures of the kind in whom I am interested at the time. I talked to judges, lawyers, teachers, business people, and even 1 or 2 pious notables. I interview the interviewers and spend a few pleasant hours with men of my own profession. I discover an assistant editor who tells me privately that he was a keen student of yoga in his younger days. He sat then at the feet of one whom he still regards as being indubitably an adept in the science of mind control, but this master died 10 years ago. The erstwhile pupil is a charming and highly intelligent Hindu, but alas, he does not know where high-grade yogis can now be found. Aside from this, I meet with little more than vague tales, foolish legends, and positive rebuffs. It is true that I meet one holy man whose Christ-like face and robes would have created a sensation in prosaic Piccadilly, but he too tells me that he is wandering the land in search of a higher life. He has renounced an estate of good farming land to become a gypsy, a holy beggar. He offers me this estate, provided that I shall settle down and serve benighted, suffering Indians. Alas, I too am a benighted, suffering mortal. His munificent offer is passed on elsewhere. Word is brought me one day concerning a reputed yogi, He lives about half a mile outside Madras, yet because he discourages acquaintance, appears to be known to few persons. My curiosity is quickly excited, and I determine to have an audience with him. The house is hidden behind tall bamboo poles which fence a square compound and which stands completely isolated in the center of a field. My companion points to the compound. I am told that the yogi is immersed in trance most of the day. It is unlikely that he will hear us even if we rattle the gate or shout his name. Even if we did those things, it would be thought rude. A rough gate gives entrance to the enclosure, but as it is strongly padlocked, I begin to wonder how we are to get into the house. Complete silence pervades the scene. We wander around the field, turn away from a piece of adjoining wasteland, and eventually meet a boy who knows where to find the residence of the yogi's attendant. A circuitous walk brings us to the place. The man proves to be a hired servant. His wife and many children come outside to see us and trail behind his heels. We tell him our desire, but he refuses to help us. He firmly declares that the sage who never speaks is not on view to stray visitors, but lives in strict seclusion. The sage's days are spent in deep trance, and he would be highly offended if all and sundry were allowed to break in on his privacy. I beg the attendant to make an exception in my favor, but he is adamant. It becomes necessary for my friend to threaten government interference if we are not admitted forthwith. A totally unjustifiable procedure, of course, but one which I illegally reinforce, though our eyes wink towards each other. There ensues an animated discussion. I supplement our threats by the lure of liberal bakshish, and it is not long before the attendant reluctantly yields and brings out his keys. My companion informs me that it is clear that the man is no more than a paid servant, because if he were a personal disciple of the sage, neither threats nor money could have moved him. We march back to the gate of the compound and unlock a massive iron padlock. The servant informs us that the sage's belongings are so few that they do not include a key. He is locked in the compound from the outside and has no means of egress until the attendant's visits, which take place twice daily. We learn further that the sage is occupied with his trances throughout the day, but in the evening he partakes of some fruit, sweetmeats, and a cup of milk. There have been many evenings, however, when the food has remained untouched. The fall of darkness sometimes brings the recluse out of his cottage, though a walk around the fields is the only exercise he takes. We cross the compound and arrive at a modern cottage. It is solidly built of stone slabs and painted timber posts. The attendant produces another key and unlocks a heavy door. I express surprise at all these precautions, for did not the servant tell us that the sage's belongings are very few? Thereupon the man tells us a brief explanatory story. Some years earlier, the silent sage lived in a cottage without the protection of any locks or fastenings upon the entrances. But one unfortunate day there came a man who was drunk with toddy liquor, and who took advantage of the defenseless state of the sage to attack him. The drunkard pulled his beard, belabored him with the stick, and shouted disgusting epithets. Chance intervened to draw some young men into the field intent upon playing a ball game. The noise of the assault drew their attention. They entered the cottage and rescued the sage from his assailant, while one of them ran off to the nearest houses to inform all and sundry. Before long, a group of excited people gathered together, Indian fashion, and began to mishandle the drunken ruffian who had dared attack a revered holy man. There was a likelihood that the man who was so dastardly would be lynched. Throughout this episode, the sage had maintained his usual stoic calmness and endurance. Now he intervened and wrote down the following message. If you beat this man, it is the same as beating me. Let him go, for I have forgiven him. Since the sage's word was unwritten law, his request was unwillingly obeyed and the miscreant set free. The attendant peers into the room and then warns us to be perfectly quiet because the sage is sunk in trance. I unlace my shoes and leave them behind on the veranda in obedience to the inexorable dictates of Hindu custom. As I bend my head, I notice a small flat stone in the wall. Its face is inscribed with Tamil characters. "The abode of the sage who never speaks," translates my companion. We entered the one-room cottage. It is lofty, well-roofed, and scrupulously clean. A raised marble dais, which is about 1 foot high, is built into the floor's center. Its surface is covered with a richly patterned Persian rug. Upon this rug sits the enhanced figure of the silent sage. Imagine a handsome man whose skin shines with a tawny blackish color, whose body is finely erect, and who sits in a peculiar attitude which I immediately identify as one of the yoga postures which Brahma has shown me. The left leg is doubled back so that the foot is under the base of the body, and the right leg is swung across the left thigh. The sage's back, neck, and head form a perfectly straight line. His hair falls in long, black strands almost to his shoulders and hangs thickly around his head. There is a sweeping black beard upon his chin. His hands are clasped over his knees. I notice that the trunk is remarkably well developed. It is very muscular, and he is clearly in a healthy condition. The only covering he wears is a loincloth. His face photographs itself immediately in my memory as the face of a man who smiles in triumph over life, a man who has conquered the frailties which we, feebler mortals that we are, harbor willingly or unwillingly. The mouth is slightly stretched, as though about to break into a smile. The nose is short and straight, almost Grecian in type. The eyes are wide open. They stare straight ahead in a fixed and unblinking gaze. The man sits like a carved rock and never moves. My informant has earlier told me that the silent sage is without doubt deeply immersed in an entranced communion wherein the human part of his nature is presumed to be sunk into temporary abeyance, and that he is quite unaware of his physical surroundings. I watch the sage steadily, but can find no room for doubt that he is in a cataleptic trance. The minutes add up into hours, but he remains motionless. What impresses me most is that throughout that time he never blinks his eyes. I have never before met any human being who could sit down and look steadily ahead for 2 hours without the flicker of an eyelid. Little by little, I am compelled to conclude that if the recluse's eyes are still open, they are nevertheless quite unseeing. If his mind is awake, it is not to the sublunary world. The bodily faculties seem to have gone to sleep. Occasionally, a teardrop falls from his eyes. It is clear that the fixation of the eyelids prevents them carrying out their usual office on behalf of the tear ducts. A green lizard descends from the roof, creeps across the carpet, crawls over one of the sage's legs, and then passes behind the marble dais. Yet, had it crawled over his stone wall, it would not have found a steadier surface than that leg. From time to time, flies settle upon his face and journey over his swarthy skin, but no muscular response can be observed. Had they alighted upon the face of a bronze statue, precisely the same effect might have been observed. I study the figure's breathing. It is extremely gentle, almost imperceptible, quite inaudible, but quite regular. It is the only sign he provides that life has not parted from the body. While we are waiting, I decide to use the time to take a photograph or two of this impressive figure. I slip my folding camera out of its leather case and focus the lens upon him from my seat on the floor. The lighting of the room is not good, therefore I give a couple of time exposures. I look at my watch. 2 hours have passed. The yogi still shows no signs of emerging from his long trance. The sculptural rigidity of his form is remarkable. I am prepared to stay all day in order to achieve my object, in order to interview this strange man. But the attendant now comes up to us and whispers that it is useless to wait any longer. Nothing will be gained by doing so. If we will come again in a day or two, better fortune might be ours. Nevertheless, he cannot promise anything definitely. We leave the place, temporarily defeated as we are, and turn our steps toward the city. My interest has not waned. On the contrary, it has heightened. During the next 2 days, I endeavored to collect some information relative to the sage who never speaks. This endeavor involves a scattered and discursive investigation, which varies from a lengthy cross-examination of his attendant to a brief interview with the police inspector. In this way, I succeed in piecing together a fragment of the sage's story. 8 years ago, he arrived in the Madras district. No one knew who he was, what he was, or whence he came. He took up his residence on the piece of wasteland which now adjoins the field containing his cottage. Inquisitive inquirers who addressed him received no reply for their pains. He spoke to none, heeded no sounds and no persons, and could not be drawn into the most casual conversation. He begged a little food occasionally by holding out his coconut shell bowl. Day after day he persisted in squatting amid these unattractive surroundings, despite his exposure to the relentless rays of a burning sun, to the heavy downpours of the monsoon season, and to dust and unpleasant insects. Never at any time did he make any effort to seek shelter, but always remained serenely oblivious to external circumstances. There was no protection for his head and no covering for his body, except for a narrow loin cloth. He never changed the yoga posture in which he sat for any other. Now the outskirts of a large city like Madras were hardly suitable for a hermit who wished to seat himself in the open air and in full public gaze in order to plunge his mind into abstracted meditations for lengthy periods. Such conduct would have won great respect in ancient India. But the modern yogi can find favorable conditions for his mystic practices only in sparse jungle spaces, forest retreats, mountain caves, or in the seclusion of his room. Why, then, did this strange hermit choose such an unsuitable spot for his meditations? An unpleasant occurrence provided the curious explanation. One day a band of youthful and ignorant hooligans came across the lonely yogi by chance and began to persecute him. They left the city with reprehensible punctuality to engage in a daily campaign of stone-throwing, dirt-flinging, and abusive jeering. The hermit continued to sit quietly and patiently endured his trials, although he was stalwart enough to be able to give them a sound thrashing. He did not even rebuke them because he was under a vow of silence. Nothing stopped the young brutes until a man happened to pass by when they were busy with their usual persecution of the yogi. The stranger was shocked at seeing a holy man so ill-treated. He went back to Madras and gave information to the police, from whom he demanded help on behalf of the voiceless yogi. The help was forthcoming, and the despicable band was dispersed with severe warnings. After this event, a police officer decided to make some inquiries about the hermit, but he was unable to find a single person who knew anything about him. So he was compelled to question the yogi, which he did with all the authority of the law. After much hesitation, the yogi wrote a brief statement upon a slate. This is what he scribbled. I am a pupil of Lomakayu. My master directed me to cross the plains and go south to Madras. He described this piece of ground and explained where I would be able to find it. He told me to take up my abode here and to continue in the steady practice of yoga until I have made myself perfect in it. I have given up the worldly life and desire only to be left alone. I have no interest in the affairs of Madras and seek nothing more than to follow my spiritual path. The police officer was quite satisfied that the man was a genuine fakir of a superior type, so he withdrew after promising protection against the hooligans. He recognized the name of Lomakayu as being that of a famous Mohammedan fakir who had recently died. Out of evil cometh good, runs the old proverb. The upshot of this unpleasant affair was that the presence of the recluse became known to a wealthy and pious citizen of Madras. The latter endeavored to tempt him into the city with the lure of residence in a fine house, but the hermit would not disobey his master's instructions. In the end, the newly found patron had to build a stone and timber bungalow near the ground which the yogi refused to leave. The latter consented to occupy it, and as it was properly roofed, he was thenceforth adequately protected against the inclemencies of changing seasons. His patron also appointed a personal attendant for the yogi. It was now no longer necessary for the latter to beg, as all his food was brought to him by the attendant. Whether his master, Mahasaya, had foreseen such a pleasant consequence of an unpleasant experience or not, it remained that the last condition of his pupil was much better than the first. I learned that the sage who never speaks has not even one pupil. He seeks none and accepts none. He is one of those solitaries who prefer to live in isolation in order to achieve their own spiritual liberation. If there is any value in the latter, then their attitude is apparently a selfish one, judged by our Western lights. And yet, when one remembers the sage's profound considerateness towards the drunkard, and his refusal to retaliate against the young hooligans, one wonders whether he can be so very selfish after all. Accompanied by 2 other persons, I make my second attempt to interview the sage who never speaks. One is my interpreter, while the second man is none other than the yogi who has taught me so much, Brahma, the Adyar anchorite, as I affectionately call him. Brahma never cares to enter the city, but when I make known the object of my visit and desire him to accompany me, he agrees without demur. At the compound we meet another visitor who has left a large car on the roadside and walked across the fields to the same objective. He too is desirous of seeing the silent sage. He tells me during a brief conversation that he is a brother of the Queen of Gadwal, a small state which is tributary to the Nizam of Hyderabad. He informs me that he also is a patron of the sage, inasmuch as he insists on making a regular contribution towards the cost of maintaining the shelter. He has come on a brief visit to Madras, but cannot leave the town without paying his respects to the sage, and perchance receiving his blessing. What the latter is worth, I learn from a story which the visitor narrates. A lady at the court of Gadwal had a child who suffered from some dread ailment. By some odd coincidence, she heard of the existence of the sage who never speaks. Such is her anxiety that she journeys to Madras and begs the hermit to grant his blessing and heal the little boy. The blessing is given, and from that date the child makes a marvelous recovery. The incident comes to the notice of the queen, who also visits the hermit. Her Highness presents him with a purse of 600 rupees, which he refuses to accept. She presses him until he writes a message saying that the money can be used to improve his shelter by fixing a fence around the cottage, so that he shall secure more privacy. The queen arranges to have this done, and thus the bamboo fence comes into being. The attendant again admits us into the cottage, where we find the recluse sunk in the same trance-like condition which he maintained throughout my first visit. We squat upon the floor in silence and wait patiently before the tall, majestic, black-bearded figure on the marble dais. About halfway through the second hour, we perceive the first signs of returning activity in the sage's body. His breathing becomes deeper and then more audible. The eyelids move. The eyeballs roll alarmingly upwards until the whites glare and then come down to normal. A slight swaying movement becomes perceptible in his trunk. 5 minutes later, the expression in the sage's eyes changes in such a way that we know he has become aware of his physical environment. He looks attentively at the interpreter, turns his head abruptly and looks at Brahma, and then at the other visitor, and turns again and looks at me. I seize the opportunity and place a pencil and a pad of paper at his feet. He hesitates a while, takes up the pencil, and writes in large, flourishing Tamil characters, "Who came here the other day and tried to take pictures?" I am compelled to admit to this activity. As a matter of fact, the effort had been useless, for I had underexposed the films. He writes again, "When you go again to yogis who are in deep trance, never disturb them by such actions. Do not attempt to break in abruptly upon their meditations. In my own case, it did not matter. But I tell you this to guide your future actions when you try to see other yogis. Such interruption may be dangerous to them, and they might put a curse upon you." It is evidently looked upon as a minor act of sacrilege to penetrate the solitude of such a man, so I express my regrets. The Queen of Gadwal's brother now proffers his devotion to the sage. When he has finished, I venture to introduce myself as one deeply interested in the ancient wisdom of India. I have heard across the seas, I inform him, that India still possesses a few men who have made remarkable attainments in yoga, and I seek to discover them. Will the sage give me such enlightenment as he thinks fit? The hermit remains statuesque, impassive. His face betrays no responsive change of expression. For fully 10 minutes he gives no sign that he has heard my request. I begin to fear that I have drawn a blank, that he regards the materialistic Westerner as unfit even for the slightest degree of enlightenment. Possibly my clumsy outrage with the camera has repelled him. Am I not expecting too much? When I expect this reserved member of a reclusive species to break his trance for the sake of an infidel, member of an alien race? A sense of chagrin rises up in me. My disappointment is too premature. The sage takes the pencil at length and scraws something upon the paper. When he has finished, I lean over and push the pad to our interpreter. What is there to understand? He slowly translates. The writing is difficult to decipher. The universe is full of problems, I rejoin, disconcerted. I fancy that a slightly derisive smile now begins to play around the lips of the sage. Since you do not understand even your own self, he asks, how can you hope to understand the universe? He looks straight into my eyes. I feel that behind his steady gaze there is some deep knowledge, some store of secrets which he is guarding with relentless care. I cannot account for this queer impression. Yet I am much bewildered, is all I can bring myself to say next. Why then do you go about like a bee which sucks mere drops of honey of knowledge, when the heavy mass of pure honey awaits you? This answer tantalizes me. It is no doubt all sufficient to an Oriental mind. Its mystic vagueness charms me as a piece of poetry, but blurs me when I look for a useful contribution that will solve some of life's problems. But where shall one look? Seek your own self, and you shall know the truth which is deep hidden therein, comes the reply. But I find only the emptiness of ignorance. I persist. The ignorance exists within your thoughts alone. He writes laconically. Pardon me, master, but your answer plunges me into still further ignorance. The sage actually smiles at my temerity. He hesitates a while, screws up his eyebrows, and then writes, You have thought yourself into your present ignorance. Now think yourself back into wisdom, which is the same as self-understanding. Thought is like a bullock cart which carries a man into the darkness of a mountain tunnel. Turn it backwards, and you will be carried back to the light again. I ruminate over his words, which still puzzle me a little. Seeing this, the sage beckons for the pad, poises the pencil in the air for a few moments, and explains. This backward turning of thought is the highest yoga. Now do you understand? A very dim light begins to dawn on me. I feel that given sufficient time in which to meditate on the matter, we shall be able to understand each other. Therefore I resolve not to press the point too much. I am so intent on watching him that I have not noticed the arrival of a fresh visitor, who has taken advantage of the open gate to enter and join us. I become aware of his presence only when he breathes a strange remark into my ear, for he is sitting immediately behind me. Whilst I am puzzling over a reply of the sage, feeling slightly disappointed at the cryptic character of his words, a mysterious murmur reaches me, its words phrased in excellent English. My master can give you the answer for which you are waiting. I turn my head and look at the intruder. He is a man not older than 40, dressed in the ochre-colored robe of a wandering yogi. The skin of his face shines like polished brass. He is well-built and broad-shouldered, a powerful-looking figure. His nose is thin, prominent, beaked like a parrot's. His eyes are small and seem to be wrinkled in perpetual laughter. He squats upon his haunches and grins broadly at me when our eyes meet. But I cannot perpetrate the rude action of entering into the desultory conversation with the stranger, so I turn back and fix my attention again upon the sage. Another question comes to the forefront of my mind. It is possibly too daring or too impertinent. Master, the world needs help. Is it right for the wise ones, such as yourself, to be lost to it in solitary retirement? A quizzical expression crosses the calm face of the hermit. My son, he replies, When you do not know yourself, how can you dream of understanding me? It is of little avail to discuss the things of the spirit. Strive to enter into your inner self through the practice of yoga. You must work hard upon this path. Then your problems will solve themselves of their own accord. I make a last attempt to draw him. The world needs a deeper light than it possesses. I would like to find it and share it. What shall I do? When you know the truth, you will know exactly what to do to serve mankind best, nor will you lack the power to do so. If a flower possesses the honey, the bee will find out of its own accord. If a man possesses spiritual wisdom and strength, he need not go in search of people. They will come, unasked to him. Cultivate your inner self until you know it fully. No other instruction is necessary. This is the only thing to do. He then informs us that he wishes to close the interview so as to resume his trance. I ask for a final message. The silent sage gazes over my head into seeming space. A minute later he pencils a reply and pushes the pad towards me. We read, I am very pleased because you came here. Take this as my initiation. I hardly finished taking in the purport of his answer when I suddenly feel a strange force entering my body. It pours through my spinal column and stiffens the neck and draws up the head. The power of will seems raised to a superlative degree. I become conscious of a dynamic urge to conquer myself and make the body obey the will to realize one's deepest ideals. And I feel intuitively that those ideals are but voices of my best self, which alone can promise me lasting happiness. A queer thought comes to me that some current is being projected to me from the sage, some invisible telepathic current. Can it be that he is thus vouchsafing to me an inkling of his own attainment? The eyes of the recluse become fixed, and the far-off look again enters them. His body becomes taut as he settles down more firmly into a familiar posture. I plainly perceive that he is withdrawing his attention into depths which may possibly be deeper than thought, and he is plunging his consciousness into inner recesses which he loves better than this world. Is he then a true yogi? Is he engaged on mysterious inward explorations which I begin to suspect may be fraught with some meaning to humanity? Who knows? When we emerge from the compound, Brahma, the Adyar anchorite, turns to me and says in a quiet voice, This yogi has reached a high state, although not the final goal. He possesses occult gifts, but is keener to perfect his spirituality. His fine bodily condition I attribute to his long practice of the yoga of body control, though I now observe that he has advanced into the art of mind control. I knew him before. When? I discovered him some years ago here, when he lived in the open field without a cottage. I recognized him for what he was, a practicing yogi following my path. I shall also tell you that he informed me, through writing of course, that in early life he was a sepoy in the army. After his period of service came to an end, he wearied of this worldly life and embraced solitude. It was then that he met the renowned fakir Lomakayu and became his disciple. We proceed in silence across the fields and then rejoin the dusty road. I do not mention to anyone the unexpected and inexplicable experience which came to me in the cottage. I want to muse over it while its echoes are yet sounding fresh within me. I never see the sage again. He does not wish me to intrude upon his secluded life, and I must respect his wish. I leave him to his lonely meditations, wrapped in his mantle of impenetrability. He has no desire to found a school or collect a following, and his ambition seems to stretch no farther than passing unobtrusively through life. He has nothing to add to what he has already said to me. He does not make an art of conversation for its own sake, as we do in the West.